Hello everybody, hope y'all are doing well. So as the title says, I made a Dark Souls 2 video a year ago and it got quite a response. Some of the responses were very positive, some were critical but fair, some were negative, and some were just plain weird. In any case, we're going to go through every comment and take a look at the overall reception to my Dark Souls 2 commentary. As a little note, this video is relevant as of December 4th, so any comment made after that will not be included. Sorry if you missed out, but I'm a slow editor and I wanted to get this done for the anniversary of the video in question. I also want to say now that these are in no particular order, besides the way YouTube listed them in the YouTube studio, so I'm not bringing them up in any particular order. But the first comment and response we'll go over are from something I pinned. Up for Discussion said, Aggro B sight is far superior to range. If you run up next to enemies they hear you, similar to real life. I won't say much about that comment itself, as Up for Discussion didn't really substantiate the argument of aggro by sight, but you do realize that you can have both, right? It's not like aggro by sight or a radial aggro via sounds are mutually exclusive. However, I did find it hilarious that the two sentences they used were contradictory. The next comment they made said, every mimic takes you in its grasp from 360 degrees immediately around them, so you actually look pretty silly whining about the hitboxes there. I mean, half the issue is that the hitboxes are poorly made, as an attack from the front shouldn't land if you're attacking from behind the mimic. So that's just poor design and execution, plain and simple. These Souls games rely on accuracy regarding hitboxes and damage detection. If every Souls game had this quality of hitboxes, the series wouldn't have seen nearly as much success as it has. It would just be a frustrating mess of trying to find out where the real hitbox is, instead of just using your eyes to look at the animations and textures used. It's more immersive and sensible when the hitboxes match up to what would or should happen given what players see on screen. Now, none of the games are perfect with their hitboxes, but Dark Souls 2 has noticeable problems. We appreciated the well-made hitboxes of Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, so Dark Souls 2 screwing that up is a blatant step down in quality. If Dark Souls 2 was the first game, I'd give it some leeway, but because it's the third game, with almost identical combat mechanics, it's a bigger problem, because it was supposed to be good, and it wasn't. Getting back to the Mimic, the other half of the problem, and this is something I neglected to bring up in my video, is that the whole gist of a Mimic is that it is a trap. When you know it's a trap, the other games allowed you to spring the trap without endangering yourself. With Dark Souls 2, it's hard to do that unless you have an appropriate weapon or build to work around it. It's arbitrarily restrictive with the triggering of mimics in Dark Souls 2. If the Dark Souls 2 mimics attempted to grab you after being hit, but the hitboxes only worked when you were in the appropriate spot to be grabbed, I'd say that was a great improvement and a strong step forward. Sadly, it's very cheap and frustrating as it is now. Anyway, Up for Discussion then said, damn, not even 4 hours in, and I had to take my like back. You're just a whiny little shit, clearly listening to too much Mitosis DS2. Hopefully you will make a real, educated breakdown on what happened in production, Miyazaki basically being worthless to the sequel, and the only game that didn't recycle whole areas. While you're at it, mention how DS2 allowed fast travel immediately, multiple item usage, dual wielding with an extra mechanic for it, the hands down best DLC in the trilogy, introduction of hexing to the mainstream from, and just general trying to not make DS1 with a different name, like Miyazaki did with DS3. Now we've got some substantive arguments to go through. First, you're entitled to take your like back at any time, so have at it. Second, I am a whiny shit, but am I wrong? Third, I've listened to Mahler criticize DS2 much more than Mr. Mitosis, as Mahler has an entire playlist lasting upwards of 9 hours, compared to Mr. Mitosis' 1 hour critique. Fourth, the production of DS2 is something that I consider to be some of From's worst management I've ever heard of. Throwing your main people onto a new IP, Bloodborne, is fine, but getting a different team to work on a sequel to a hit is not going to end well. Just delay the sequel and work on it later, especially considering that you may have new advantages given the new and better hardware. Focus on the quality of the product and it will not disappoint. There's also the matter of re-releasing the game shortly after, with a few changes and calling it a new game. That's ridiculous. Going from one generation of tech to another isn't a bad idea, but doing it a year later with minimal changes just to nickel and dime your fanbase is a good way to brew disdain for your company. Fifth, The only game that didn't recycle whole areas. What are you talking about? None of the 3 Dark Souls games recycle a whole area in another installment. DS1 reused Darkroot Garden for the DLC, which is fine given that it takes place during the past. And Dark Souls 3 only used the main building from Anor Londo and the lift up to it. It's not even a full area. It's the bonfire outside and the bonfire inside Aldrich's boss arena. Everything else is unique or was redesigned to fit whatever they were referencing, Anor Londo in particular. These aren't copy and paste situations for any of the 3 games. Now for the second half of that comment. I covered immediate fast travel being a path that leads to unoriginal and simple design choices, but you would know that if you watched the whole video. The comment about multiple item usage makes no sense to me, and I'm 95% sure that this is a typo. Otherwise, it's just dumb to say Dark Souls 2 was the first to implement multiple item usage. I'm really hoping that's a typo. Otherwise, it's a ridiculously dumb thing to say. Dual wielding was a neat idea and mechanic, but I don't really care for it, so I didn't talk about it too much. The best DLC of the trilogy is a massive red flag if you think cheap ambushes, constant rerouting, annoying and repetitive bosses, and frustrating restrictions make the best DLC the trilogy has to offer. Now, I'm not unreasonable, and I will agree that there are some cool things about the DLCs of Dark Souls 2. I like the Fume Knight, Sur Alan, and the Burnt Ivory King fights, but the rest? Not what I'd call the best of the trilogy. I consider the DLC to Dark Souls 1 to be the best of the bunch for the total package, but I'll cover that more in depth in my Dark Souls 3 commentary. Regarding the introduction of hexing to the mainstream From, I'm not sure what they mean by this, as Dark Souls 1 has hexes. Granted, the hexes in Dark Souls 1 are in the DLC, and there are a lot more hexes in Dark Souls 2, but this isn't really an introduction to them. They're just a lot easier to come by now. Also, what does mainstream From mean? The last section about trying not to make DS1 with a different name is what shows me that this person hasn't played Dark Souls 3, or at least, not enough. Dark Souls 3 does have a debt to Dark Souls 1 for many aspects of its design choices, but I'd say about 80% or more is made of original ideas or expands upon things from its predecessors. There are a lot of references here and there to Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, but that's because it's a sequel. You do that in sequels. You mention what came before, especially since it is the final Dark Souls game. Now we see what I sent back, just linking Mahler's playlist to his Dark Souls 2 response series, as that explains things better than I can and in greater detail, as I tackle the game from my and Skeptic's perspectives, but Mahler responds to an avid fan of it, so he'd be able to bridge the gap better than I can. After that, Jester Jingles chimes in explaining a lot of what I already said, but adds some distinction for their perspective of each DLC. The last line of Jester's comment said, thematically, I'd say all they did was try to make DS1 again, which I believe he was referring to Dark Souls 3, which is fair, but I could also see how you could say something similar referring to Dark Souls 2. The next comment by Thrashing Puts explains much more of what I said earlier. Up for Discussion responded to this, saying, I agree, DS3 tried to make DS1 again. It was a cash grab with some new gameplay. I like that last line, as it shows the hypocrisy in Up4's argument, since he'll call Dark Souls 3 a cash grab, but ignores Scholar of the First Sin. Anyway, Up4 goes on to say, the DS2 DLC is pretty agreed upon as some of the best in the whole From catalog. I'm simply going to say this, you need to talk to skeptics of the game more. You'll see why I go over so many problems within the DLC, because this is either a conflation of Up4's opinions as a fact in the community, or they've not really seen others' perspectives on why they could be considered the worst DLCs of the From catalog. The next part of Up4's comment said, it's a very tough spot, DS2. It had the makings of the best, but got overshadowed by its broken production. I personally don't hold that against the game, and realize they made a very good game in half the time. This is a point I can sympathize with, as DS2 did have a troubled production, given how it was handled by From and Miyazaki's hands-off approach, which I hear was supposed to foster creativity in the new directors, but I can't confirm that. However, it was a bad idea to hand off the project to an almost entirely different team. The last 2 games did well under the original teams, but Dark Souls 2, its DLC, and Scholar of the First Sin were done by a different team, resulting in many changes that many fans of the series noticed to be subpar, or where interesting ideas were introduced, but they didn't mix well with the previous mechanics in mind. Getting back to Up4's comment, I wouldn't use the term overshadowed to describe the overarching problems of DS2 and its production. DS2 should have been delayed until the normal team could come back to it after finishing Bloodborne, not handed off to new people who clearly misunderstood the content of the previous games. This is also interesting to note that Dark Souls 2 has so many production and execution problems that the other games don't have, and the only reasonable reaction to that, at least for me, is to blame the developers for it. The fact that Dark Souls 2 got a director's cut with minimal changes showed many people that the team for Dark Souls 2 weren't just making mistakes when working on the game or misunderstanding things they would later fix, but were unable to deliver on the quality that the other team delivered, design team delivered, and what the original Dark Souls 2 was is largely what they were working for. Think of it this way. The DS2 team decided to release the game without delivering what they would consider to be their completed work. Then they re-release it a year later with a few differences and sell it as a new game on a new console and call it the Director's Cut, which is supposed to be their completed work. But none of the other games have had this problem, where this new version just changes a few spawns and raises the game to the technical level it was already supposed to be at for its original launch. Dark Souls 2 didn't live up to expectations, not because it wasn't Dark Souls 1, but because the team couldn't reach the same heights as the normal team, and it shows when you compare Dark Souls 2 and its remake that really should have been a patch at most. They were not up to par, and they decided to nickel and dime their customers for a subpar product at the same time. Even if you like Dark Souls 2, which I actually do, you must concede that reselling a game within a year with only a few changes and only delivering the promised technical quality of 1080p and 60 FPS on the re-release is an absolutely scummy way to treat your fans. Anyway, Up4 made another comment responding to Thrashing Puts, saying, "I wasn't talking about DS1, as I feel that is the true beginning. I'm talking about DS3, which anyone who played DS1 could tell recycled many areas and ideas from the original." You feel that DS1 is the true beginning? It literally is the beginning. This isn't something you feel, it's just a fact. If you said this about Demon Souls, that's totally a fair point, but saying this about Dark Souls 1 makes me wonder if Up4 knows what objectivity is. Again, recycled many areas and ideas from the original is a misrepresentation of Dark Souls 3, and I would encourage people to look up videos of raw gameplay of each game and look for the many areas and ideas recycled from the original. You'll find some, but not to the extent that Up4 talks of. Getting to the next section, Up4 said, "Not that recycling is bad, but the new elements of the game should be superior, and I didn't feel that at all in Dark Souls 3, where I did in Dark Souls 2. The new mechanics, while rushed and not as good as they could have been, could have revolutionized, and somewhat did, the world of FromSoft." This is where you realize that this is all coming from opinion and not fact, as Up4 uses the term feel and could to get their points across, inadvertently saying that this is unproven and speculative, which doesn't really add much to the conversation. Now, using factual evidence to explain an opinion helps bridge the gap between fact and opinion, but it seems Up4 is comfortable in subjective land. Secondly, thinking Dark Souls 2 mechanics were superior, but Dark Souls 3 mechanics were not, is a bold mechanical criticism that needs explanation, but we don't get that, as Up4 seems to assume their views are just the norm, without adding anything to substantiate that view. Talking of the could have revolutionized and somewhat did the world of FromSoft line, there is a particular section of Mahler's response where he shows a long list of mechanics that were dropped going from Dark Souls 2 to 3, with very little carrying over. I wouldn't say DS2 somewhat revolutionized the world of FromSoft. It was more of a blob of experimentation with the Dark Souls name on it. It had a few hits, with a long list of misses that were dropped in the sequel. I feel like this is just Up4 trying to legitimize their appreciation for Dark Souls 2. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You can love anything you want, but don't say it's good when it can be proven it's not. I love watching the Transformers movies, but I understand that they're shallow CGI festivals of sexy women and robots fighting. I understand it's shit, but I still like it. You can like shit and hate perfection, and that's fine. Just don't lie to yourself and say it's better than it is. Now on to the next comment. Amandor, sounds like a cool Tolkien-esque name, said, "Don't know about you, but I'd always take a safe sequel with familiar themes and areas while not innovating on many things, rather than a terrible sequel that has almost no connection to OG games lore, which attempts something new but has 10 misses and 1 hit." To that, I'd largely agree. but it is good to have some experimentation. But if half your project is crazy new ideas that aren't fleshed out, then don't expect them to carry over to the next project. This is something I mentioned in the video, where I said Dark Souls 2 feels like more of a Demon Souls sequel than a Dark Souls sequel. I plan to rant about this in my Dark Souls 3 commentary, but the basic gist is that From Software hasn't really made a true sequel to Dark Souls, spiritual or otherwise, because a lot of ideas and mechanics found in Dark Souls 2, 3, and Bloodborne are born from Demon Souls, not Dark Souls 1, or don't link back to Dark Souls 1. Now, they may have similarities and have the franchise name, but Dark Souls 2 and 3 have just as much in common with Demon Souls as they do Dark Souls. The only major differences would be the lore, the maps, and refinement of some of the mechanics. This is something I'll cover later, but Amandor isn't finished. They wrote another comment saying, and no, not every mimic takes you in its grasp from 360 degrees, lol. Standing mimics never did that. You always could come around them during the grab and don't get hit. In Dark Souls 3, these on all fours mimics are also present and never do shit like that. All of this is true, and really makes the mimics from Dark Souls 2 look like cheap killers that basically cheat to kill you. Up4 responds one last time before leaving, saying, every mimic in DS2, and I really don't care to debate further here. DS2 gets tons of unwarranted hate because people aren't good at the game. Simple as that. It's not perfect, but it's better than DS3 for their respective times and production, easily. This is basically where Up4 folds and basically says, you suck at the game, so your opinion is shit. Even though the game makes it hard to understand itself without third-party information from a wiki, or rampant testing to figure things out. I would respond to this, but Amandor's response serves that purpose for me, saying, so if every mimic in Dark Souls 2 can grab your ass when you're clearly behind it, this somehow makes it alright and not a terrible design. And how easy it is to just call someone bad when they justifiably criticize your favorite game, am I right? And I'm not even talking about the fact that Dark Souls 2 is the easiest Soulsborne game, due to 9,000 cheap healing items. ADP is a stat which allows you to have almost twice as much iframes compared to Dark Souls 1 and 3, when maxed out, and the fact that 90% of the bosses are incredibly simple in terms of movesets, with numerous reskins. So an argument DS2 gets hate because people are bad at it doesn't even make sense, because this game is not hard. It's often very frustrating and tedious, but not hard at all. And I agree 100% with what Amandor said, but I will add that a lot of people who dislike Dark Souls 2 who are bad at the game are bad because the game doesn't tell you about several things that are imperative to your run. ADP being the biggest example of the game not telling players something invaluable to know. Then Hateful Gaming chimes in saying, bro, ain't no way you defending the mimic hitboxes, which I think is a gloriously hilarious way to end that comment thread. Now we can get away from some negativity. The next comment chain actually comes from me, as I noticed that I forgot to edit out an extra take. Then Dr. Dungus, radical name, said Matthew Matosis did that twice in his Demon Souls commentary. Don't feel too bad about it. I responded saying I never noticed, and I felt lacking now, because I missed that, and then lulled it off. Dungus responded again saying, lol, I may have rewatched those videos a dozen times. Thanks for making yours, by the way. More videos of this type are always great. To that, I say thank you. And I agree that videos like this are great, and that's why I made one. I wanted more out there. Then Up4 hopped in to shit on me, saying, doesn't matter, it's a shit breakdown anyway, and if you want to sound like a game critic, at least research the game. I don't want to sound like a game critic. I want to sound like a gamer that can explain what I think is good and bad design in an effective manner that others can understand. A lot of game critics nowadays seem dumber than your average rock. Anyway, I asked Up4 to explain what I did wrong, and I'll fix it next time, but as we went through earlier, Up4 is a bit prickly. The next comment comes from Raul Remessel van Merode, I hope I didn't screw that up, who said, I love Matthew Matosis, his Soulsborne series, and although I just started watching this video, I want to thank you for it. As someone who loves the games and is only now starting to love Bloodborne, this commentary will quench my thirst for the Dark Souls trilogy, which I have never played. Thanks for watching and enjoying it. Hopefully I can do more of these and improve more as I go. Connor McCloskey commented, Matt's Dark Souls Demon Souls commentary are some of my favorite videos on here. This is exactly what I wanted from him. Thank you. Thank you for liking what I did. I'm grateful for the comparisons to Mr. Matos's work, as I think he's a very high-quality game critic, and is one of the few I think actually deserves the praise he gets. Marty Allen gets the next comment by saying, this is like a DLC pack of Matt's commentary. I love it. Keep it up. Proud of you. 10 out of 10. Again, thank you. I do this because I want more of Mr. Matosis' commentaries to exist, as they essentially act as walkthroughs with insight sprinkled on top, for added flavor. Luke, with a very nice Elden Ring profile pic, commented, I honestly respect the work and resilience making a 7-hour commentary on a Souls game would take. You did a really good job. Thank you. I appreciate that you appreciate me slocking away at my computer for weeks to make that video. The next comment chain starts with James Brinsfield saying, I've been waiting on Matthew Matosis to make a follow-up to his original commentary for the better part of a decade to no avail. I'm really glad this ended up in my recommended videos, though I do wish it was Scholar of the First Sin. Thank you for making this. To this, I'd say I feel similarly to him, as the only reason I made this video was because Mr. Matosis did not. I probably wouldn't have made it if he had already. Regarding Scholar of the First Sin, I didn't use that as I believe it's fair to judge the first real outing of a game, especially when it isn't early access. So I think reviewing the base Dark Souls 2 was basically saying, I will cover your game, but not the cheap money grab that came after. Given that, I'd say that people should only get one or the other, as it's not worth the money to get both. If you had to pick one, I'd say get Scholar of the First Sin, as it's technically better, and I believe more people play it than the original at this point. I may be wrong, though. And lastly, thank you. Flood responded to James saying, yeah, Scholar of the First Sin is technically a ripoff, but to me it's no different than KH Final Mix of Pokemon Emerald. Scholar of the First Sin made some interesting changes that would have been worth commenting on, like its better use of lighting and potential lore commentary from updated enemy placements. Plus, in general, it would have been interesting to hear about where Scholar of the First Sin fixed vanilla Dark Souls 2 issues, and vice versa. We can dream of another 7-hour commentary, but I'm not complaining about it, the one we do have. As I don't know much about Pokemon period, I guess I'll take Flood's word for it on the game mentioned. After playing through Scholar of the First Sin, only once mind you, I didn't really have much to say about the changes, other than they really should have been a patch, as it did fix some things, but also created new problems at the same time. I do think it was sweet to mention dreaming of another 7-hour commentary, but not complaining about the one I made. That was nice to hear. Anyway, James responded, saying, I've never viewed it as a ripoff, but I also view DS2 a lot more favorably than other people do, so I'd be more willing to purchase it more than once than someone who didn't. I didn't play the DLC until I got Scholar of the First Sin, so that also softened the blow. I still think if you're going to do a long after-the-fact retrospective analysis like this, you should do it with the definitive version of the game. I don't know the story behind the game being re-released though. It's like a director's cut, where the team listened to criticisms or changed things they weren't happy with at release. I think it's slightly unfair to critique the original while ignoring the re-release since it's closer to their true version, although most games don't get that chance, so I can see the other side of the argument too. But it could also be the case that they changed just enough things around to justify charging $60 for it. In that case, I feel like it's fair game to critique the original. The changes they made did make a positive difference in my overall enjoyment of the game though, so I feel like it's worth mentioning. As an overall response to that comment, I'd say that I stand by what I said earlier about reviewing what they put out as a definitive game. Director's cut or otherwise, the original version of Dark Souls 2 is what they gave the world. Scholar should have been a massive patch, and they shouldn't have charged $60 for it. They shouldn't have charged anything for it, in my opinion. If you own the original, you got a discount, but that's still basically paying for an update that should have been free. Plus, Scholar didn't really fix and change enough to be warranted as a new release. From was just capitalizing on the next generation of consoles coming out, and that's all I can really say about that. It should have been an update, not a separate game, regardless of price. The next comment comes from VG Docs, saying, I'm only 5 minutes in, but I just wanted to let you know that players like myself really appreciate making such a lengthy and certainly high-effort video. I've been jonesing for a Matthew Matosis commentary of literally anything in the series other than Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1 since I watched those so long ago. I feel your pain, and thank you for the appreciation. Hopefully these videos will only get better as they go. The next comment comes from Trubix, saying, excellent video. Some mistakes here and there, but for a 7-hour video is understandable. However, a few things that I would like to point out are, the Duke's dear Freya isn't the old one, the dragon was. That's why her soul wasn't special and you have to embrace it in the floor. It confused me the first time until I looked up and I said, oh, so that's where it came. The painting of Nishandra that curses you in Draenlane Castle is actually a foreshadowing of her true nature. This was as entertaining as Matthew Matosis' commentary. Well done. Just a question, do you plan to do a Dark Souls 3 commentary? There's already a commentary of Bloodborne from another YouTuber, so DS3 is the only one that doesn't have one. This is a lot to cover, but first off, thanks for the positive feedback. Now that I've had a year to look over the video, I've noticed several mistakes I've made, which I'll address more as they come up, or I'll mention them in my Dark Souls 3 commentary, which I am working on by the way. To the point about Freya not being the old one, I think this is the lore confusing itself, as there are mentions to Seath's soul from the first game transforming, but the dragon doesn't match Seath's form, and the dragon matches the ancient dragon, so it must be different from Seath, and the ancient dragon soul has the same texture as the old one's souls, but the ancient dragon soul isn't an old one, and there's just a lot of confusing, well, if this is this, then this must be this, but it can't be this because this are this, and so on. Granted, I may have missed something, but from what I've read, it doesn't seem like it makes sense to have the dragon in Freya's cave drop it. I'd rather look at it as Freya just consumed the souls from the dragon, becoming an old one, but the devs forgot to change the texture and amount. That might be wrong, but I haven't found much that makes a better situation without stretching other ideas kind of thin. Talking of Nashandra's painting, that seems like a dead giveaway that she's evil when her painting will curse you. I imagine the picture was made before Drangleic fell, so it seems kinda odd that a picture of the queen never unsettled anyone enough to ask what the queen was doing before it was too late. Plus, we never fight a hollow painter, but I might be wrong on this too. Regarding the Dark Souls 3 commentary, which I mentioned earlier, I am making one, but it'll take a while, and I have heard of the Bloodborne commentary, but I haven't watched it. I will probably watch it in preparation of my Dark Souls 3 commentary, but Bloodborne is so different from the other Souls games that it may not be worth it. I'll give it some thought and mention it if I watch it in the DS3 video. The next comment thread starts with Brian Hunter saying, "Although I still love this game, locking iframes behind a stat has got to be the most baffling design choice ever. While the iframe stat is a super weird design choice, I don't think I'd call it the most baffling, but that's up for debate." Flood shows up again to comment, "It's a shame, because everything else the stat does is cool. Souls in general should just stop playing around with iframes. Cheesing your way through enemy attacks should just not even be a viable option. It's the literal antithesis of what a dodge is supposed to be. The complete removal of them would probably go a long way in counteracting the roll-to-win strategy everything past 2 relies on. I'm glad it was nerfed in Sekiro. It made that game's combat different and more interesting." The first part about what ADP does besides iframes is something I agree with, as adaptability, by the nature of the name, would certainly make sense to increase the speed of item usage and poise. You adapt through your adaptability trait, which makes total sense to me. Then Flood goes over stopping iframes usage, and this is where things go downhill faster than jumping off a cliff. First, using iframes is not cheesing your way through an enemy attack. Iframes are in all of the Souls games. It's a mechanic, just like blocking, parrying, and taking the hit. Second, iframes are the literal antithesis of what a dodge is supposed to be. That is blatantly wrong. Iframes allow you to dodge an attack, because the attacks are often very large moving hitboxes, and unless our characters are all anime characters or can teleport, we're not going to be able to dodge some attacks. If they removed iframes, that severely limits combat, because attacks now have to be dealt with in another way that leads to enemies having much less varied movesets and designs. This is because a character will have to be able to block or parry every attack instead of dodging. This would not work in the Souls series, as some attacks can't be blocked or parried, and many attacks couldn't be used because dodging wouldn't be an option. Imagine any boss with an attack that can be dodged through. Now imagine every boss being restricted, where their attacks can only be blocked or parried, or, in the worst case scenario, you are forced to take the hit, because dodging forward, backward, to the left or the right wouldn't make a difference when the attack sweeps across the front of an enemy, and its range and hitbox is larger than your dodge distance. Iframes are unrealistic, sure, but this lets the series do crazy things with its bosses. Imagine trying to deal with Midir's laser if you can't dodge, or if you try to block all of the Corvian dickhead's 50-part attack combo. This series is all about options with risks and rewards depending on the scenario. Blocking will mitigate most damage, but it's easy to achieve, and you may still take damage depending on your blocking mechanism. Parrying gives you the risk of being hit, but grants you bonus damage if you land it. Dodging has a simple risk of making the dodge and avoiding damage altogether, or missing the timing and taking a hit. These are options, and options in an RPG are a good thing, especially when implemented well. Dark Souls 2 has problems, but the choices you make help you deal with said problems. ADP iframes being the prime example of a problem being presented and then solved via leveling. Removing iframes would drastically restrict combat, or they would have to redesign every attack to account for it. It wouldn't be good to do it in another Souls game. In Sekiro, it's fine, since Sekiro is a drastically different game from the Souls series, and it does make the combat in Sekiro more interesting, but removing a viable mechanic in a series will restrict players' options, and we don't like that. Also, the roll to win strategy is the same as parry to win, or block to win. You use a strategy because it works, and the developers have to come up with ways to make the combat interesting around the strategies involved. Sekiro has several attacks where dodging is unavoidable, but the game has been built to account for that. The Souls series have different rules, so they will have different strategies accordingly. The next comment comes from Grilled Asparagus, who corrects me when I refer to Ceaseless Discharge as bug death, where you knock him off the cliff, saying, "At 6:06:32, just wanted to say that for anyone who still isn't aware, it's not a bug. I'm not sure how anyone could come to the conclusion that this is unintentional, since he has a unique animation for jumping onto the ledge and hanging from it. He has no ground below him to stand on while hanging from the ledge, so you're essentially prying his hands from the cliff, so he falls into the magma pit below him. I didn't realize it wasn't a bug until I saw a Zully the Witch video on it. I think it's reasonable to say you may not notice him hanging as you're caught up in the moment, so you may miss some details of it. Especially since he dies and falls like every other boss does when it's defeated. They fall over, and since we're fighting him on the edge of a cliff anyway, it's not unreasonable to say we just killed him via some bug. Plus, think about making a boss with an exploit that can make the fight trivial. I wouldn't call that a good idea, whether a bug or not. Regardless, I was wrong, and I'll admit that. By the way, Zully the Witch is a great behind-the-scenes channel for anything From Software does, so go check her out if you've ever had a weird question about anything in these games. The next comment is from Sprit Specs, who said, "Keep up the good work. Really amazed over the stamina and focus required to complete a 7-hour video. Thanks for the compliment. And after finishing my Dying Light commentary, I think my stamina and focus has improved, as the Dark Souls 2 commentary took a few years of on and off again work, while the Dying Light video was finished in less than a year." Next up is Kletokings, I probably screwed that up, who said, "This is my third attempt at playing this game. I even bought it twice, once on my PlayStation and once on my Xbox, but I just could not keep going past the first few bosses. After trying a few Souls-like, such as Code Vein and others which did not satisfy my soul's itch, I'm finally 15 hours in and is not as bad as I originally thought. Not near as good and the rest of the Souls games, which I platinumed, or Neo 1 and 2, but better than the rest of the Souls-like. I'd say that's a fair reaction to the game if you're coming into it now after all the Souls copycats have come up. It's not as bad as some of the other games out there, it's mainly just a big letdown from the others in the series." The next comment comes straight from the great Roman ruler Julius Caesar, who starts off saying, "Well, this was a great video. I really enjoyed it, especially the part at the end where you discuss the design decisions. Keeping a viewer engaged for 7 hours is quite a feat. Also, I have to commend you on not sounding boring. I try to watch as many similar videos as possible, but some of them just sound so boring. Oh well. To this I say, Hail Caesar! Also, thank you for the compliments. Frankly, I thought I did alright, but stuff like this makes me feel like I can do great things." Then he continues saying, "Now on to the video itself. I wish you would have cut back on the I go to the right and open a chest parts, and instead tried to make some of the points you make at the end during these parts. It would cut down on the length a bit, not that it's a problem in and of itself. As my comment to him will later show, I did realize that all of the this is here and I did this type of stuff is really useless and shit. So I avoided that in my Dying Light video. Hopefully by Dark Souls 3 commentary time, I'll be able to avoid any useless stuff like that." He then says, "My take on there being life gems is that they decided to stick with the start out with only one flask and gradually get more. But there would have been the risk of some players not going out of their way to explore, and they would have missed out on healing items, rendering the game nearly impossible and making the players quit. To mitigate this problem, they introduced life gems, or at least that's what I think. Everything I just read makes total sense to me, and I would definitely say that that was the developer's mindset at the time. So good on you, Julius. You're living up to your name." Then he ends his first message with a very kind, "Anyway, great video overall. I look forward to more. Subscribed." Thank you for that. Comments like these help me grow and get better, and those are the best comments a creator can get. Now we'll get to my response, where I thank him for his enthusiasm and how I now realize how useless some of the script was for the video. Lord Caesar replied, saying, "For a first critique video, it's great, so I look forward to improvements in the coming ones. and hopefully you watch the Dying Light commentary, because those improvements can be seen there. Also, a huge thanks to you, Julius Caesar, for your kind words and constructive criticism. The next comment comes from Neverdusk, who says, watches Matthew Matosis Demon Souls and Dark Souls videos for the Xth time. Wishes there was a similar video for the other Souls games. Suddenly finds Acer Aesthetics video on Bloodborne. Suddenly finds this video on Dark Souls 2. And so, the cycle is complete. But it is not complete. Not yet, anyway. Be wary of the overlong Dark Souls 3 commentary to come. It's going to be a doozy to go over, and I expect it to be even longer than my Dark Souls 2 commentary, complete with a retrospective of the whole series at the end. The next comment comes in from this person. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, as I'm sure I'll butcher it. They say, you can't take the throne right after you defeat Throne Watcher and Defender if you haven't defeated the Giant Lord and obtained the Giant's kinship. Without it, you are not fit to take the throne, and is basically why the golems don't reanimate to make a path to it. This is why Nishandra and Aldia, if you met him in all locations, don't spawn in the area. I already knew what this person was talking about, but I was talking about how the throne is just open for the taking if someone builds a long bridge out of something simple like wood planks. My main point was how open and defenseless the throne feels after Throne Watcher and Defender. If they locked that area off until Nishandra was available to fight, I wouldn't have a problem, but it seems weird how you can get to the throne before getting things that make Nishandra meet you at the throne to kill you. It's kind of backwards, but maybe I didn't phrase myself correctly, so this person misunderstood my point. Anyway, the next comment comes from Ken from Detroit, who says, great vid, bro. I've been passing out to it for a week now. Also, great content. Would love to see one for DS3 or Bloodborne. Thanks for the support. I won't do one for Bloodborne, as I don't really like playing it, so sorry about that. But I will definitely do a Dark Souls 3 one. The next comment comes from the Tombstone 85, saying, hey, just started the video and liking it so far, but wanted to give my 2 cents to the thing about the DLC keys. They lock the DLC areas, because you can co-op them with people who haven't bought the add-ons. Also, even if you haven't purchased the DLC, these areas are already in your game files, stored locally on your hard drive. Still kind of an arbitrary wall, but I guess that's the reason. That's a really good point, and hackers will have a field day with the free content. I also didn't know that there was a co-op for those who didn't own some parts of the package. That's kind of weird, but pretty nice all things considered. The next comment comes from Amandor again, saying, at 2:57:35, we somewhat had such an encounter in DS1 with Centipede Demon, and its limbs being alive after you cut them off. I missed that while playing Dark Souls 1, but that just reinforces how many good ideas came before Dark Souls 2 that Dark Souls 2 didn't expand upon or reuse. The next comment comes from Uriel and his human, who gave a harrowing tale of his experience with the game. I accidentally killed Ornifex on my first playthrough due to the phenomenally stupid spot they placed that character in. You fall into a pit of basilisks, panic, go for the first door you see, and now you're in a tiny room with an NPC and a pack of basilisks breathing down your neck. Naturally, Ornifex died in the chaos. I think we've all experienced that, my friend. It is a true day of pain. The next comment is short and sweet from Sir Kiko Smore, who says, a much-needed spiritual successor. Thank you very much. No, thank you. You're all the reason I make this stuff, because I know somebody else would have wanted stuff like this to exist. The next comment comes from Ivan Ojeda, who said, never seen a video more deserving of views than this one. Great quality, man. Keep it up. Thanks, Ivan. It means a lot to me that people are able to enjoy my content. The next comment is from D. Raven, who says, if Matthew ain't gonna make another Souls video, I'm glad somebody is. Good work, mate. Thanks. And who else is gonna talk the series to death? The next comment comes from Seva Veritas, saying, regarding the fall damage in Dark Souls 2, I don't believe they increased the damage taken from falls, but changed the formula for how the damage is calculated. Fall damage in Dark Souls 1 and 3 was a percentage of the character's maximum health. Not 100% sure on this about Dark Souls 1. While in Dark Souls 2, I believe they changed the formula from percentage-based to a flat value. This can explain why the damage is so high. The increase to damage proportional to the distance fallen had to be large enough so that players wouldn't survive falls they should not, which of course backfired in the sense that players take absurd damage from small falls. I'm sure some could interpret such a change as just increasing the damage. I have no source for this theory. I thought of it when thinking about the high fall damage between Dark Souls 2 versus the other entries in the Soulsborne line of games. I mean, I'm running on game experience and nothing deeper than that. What you said could be completely plausible, or it could be as simple as take X amount of damage per X distance of a fall. But neither of us know, so we're just sitting here making stuff up that makes sense at this point. It doesn't really matter anyway, since the main point is that the fall damage in DS2 is worse than the others. The next in line is a comment from Dust Rose, who says, I mean, what can I say after such a lengthy review? I didn't finish it in one sitting. I would have if I had the stretch of time. But I always came back to it, which I think speaks to the strength of this video. I also appreciate your little bouts of humor weren't too jarring in comparison with the tone of the rest of the video. I doubt I'll ever play a Dark Souls game, lacking the skill, money, and console since my bro moved out, but I'm perfectly content enjoying it through the lens of people like you. Bravo, sir, for keeping me occupied for 7+ hours. I turn that like button blue in your honor. First off, I hope you get a chance to play these games. They can be very engaging. Second, thank you for the praise. I'm surprised that it turned out as good as it did. I thought it'd be worse. The next comment is short and sweet from Christian Morado, who says, Man, I used this video to fall asleep. Hope you make another one. If that's a compliment, thank you. If it's not, you're welcome. May you have a good nap. The next comment thread is kinda long, but it basically goes back and forth between this guy, Johann Burgermeister, and myself, talking about his perspective and insight into the opening cinematic and what's actually in the game. I'll leave it up so you can see it, but it basically boils down to I said what was in the game, and he explains that he saw some things that have some symbolic storytelling. I'm not criticizing the dude, just want to try to clear it up since I was a little confused at first when talking to him. I did find it funny at the end when D. Raven popped up to say, DS2 boys always be grasping at straws, which I agree with sometimes, but I don't think Johann meant anything malicious by it. He was just stating his opinion, and that's fine. The next comment comes from Twilight Phantom, who says, I'm pretty certain that the little ones are the fireflies, which are the lights around enemies. You may be right, and we're all just reading into this too much. Either way, the wiki needs to be fixed regarding that, so it reflects every theory as I mainly got my theory from reading the wiki and disagreeing. Nice Decepticon pick, by the way. The next comment is by Diane Nocte, I think that's right, who says, You clearly put a lot of effort into this commentary, so I say great job on that regard. I don't necessarily agree with some of the things you said. Even though Dark Souls 2 is my least favorite in the series, I don't have such a harsh opinion on it, and I think its good parts and ideas are often overlooked. But I very much respect the hard work it must have taken you to create this video, so hats off to that. Hopefully this commentary will get many more views in the future. Thank you for being so civil, Diana. If more people were respectful of others and agreed to communicate instead of ignore each other, the world would be a better place. I do think I was a little harsh to the game during the video, but I still think the end of the video encapsulates how I feel about the game. It's not as good as the rest of From's games, but it's still quite a lot of fun. Dr. Dungus returns for this next comment, starting by saying, I'm watching this at work, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I like your description of why the leveling system in DS1 is superior to the sequels. I've always thought that myself, and I think your reasons, especially the point about the fire bringing power, add a lot of depth to that point. Glad you agree. It's bugged me how every other game tried to be like Demon Souls' system instead of acting like a sequel to Dark Souls. The good doctor goes on to say, I think the next time you should turn up the game sound though. In Matthew's commentaries, you can hear everything in the game at like 66% of the volume of his voice, which really grounds the video in the world he's doing a tour of. I responded to that basically saying that I'm going to work on this as I go and figure out how best to do it. I like the idea of what I did with the DS2 video, where I'd have music corresponding to the music of the bosses or of the area, but it may be more trouble than it's worth, so I may drop it in the Dark Souls 3 commentary. I'm not sure about that yet, but I will keep it in mind. After my comment, Jack of No Trades says he's happy to hear this, and then shits on me for being a Let's Play channel. I like gaming content in all of its forms. Jay Hitcho chimes in with a simple, enjoyed your commentary and enthusiasm for the series, to which I give my thanks. Pandemonium then comes in with high praise, saying, this is an insanely well-made video, which really isn't true, but I'll accept it anyway. Hopefully it'll be more insanely well made in the future. Sam Crow chimes in with a funny comment that quotes me, saying, this game really likes cats for some reason. Cats are reason enough to love them. Touché, Sam. Well played. The next comment comes in a pair as Bud631 says, this is really well done. Am I the only person that thinks the DLCs are good but have a lot of bad design? My god, I feel like they are overrated a bit. Then this is followed up by Dylan Surendranath saying, "Speaking as someone who prefers Dark Souls 2 over Dark Souls 3, I definitely agree with you about the DLCs being overrated. The DLCs feel like the devs doubling down on the issue with enemy spam instead of carefully considering enemy placement, since pretty much every area has the worst case of spam, on par with Scholar of the First Sin. Unfortunately, even though the level design in each DLC is better than the main game, there's always one area for each that is rage-inducing: Cave of the Dead in Shelva, Iron Passage in Broom Tower, and Frigid Outskirts in Aleum Lois. I say thank you to the compliment by Bud, but Dylan has pretty much said all I would say about the DLCs and each DLC's area of agony, as he has mentioned." The next comment chain begins with Neverdusk saying, "I'm only about halfway through, but so far this has been a great commentary, and I really appreciate all the work you put behind it. Though you have a lot of criticisms, you always explain your thoughts well enough for me to get behind or understand, even if I might disagree, which isn't too often, admittedly. So it doesn't necessarily feel needlessly negative. I tend to watch a lot of retrospective, commentaries, long-form reviews, so it's always nice to find someone with a confident and well-explained voice who is passionate enough to make something like this happen. I have a particular fascination for the Soulsborne games, and think they naturally lend themselves to videos like these. I would really look forward to a video on Dark Souls 3, which I think still lacks a major long-form commentary in this style, or even your own version of a Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne commentary, just to hear your particular thoughts on them. That said, I'd also look forward to commentaries in this style by you for other games. I noticed that most of your videos are non-commentary walkthroughs, but if you create a second channel that focused on commentaries, I think you could grab a decent amount of attention, even if these commentaries were less than half the length and only put out every few weeks or so. Though I understand that creating something like this is a huge undertaking and might not be an experience that most people want to go through regularly, haha." That is the type of comment I was hoping for when making this video. Someone who gets it and appreciates long-form stuff like this. Thank you, Neverdusk, for getting it and caring about this type of work. You're half the reason I do this. The other half is just to have this stuff exist. Anyway, after that lengthy comment, I responded basically explaining my next commentary and how I think I'm improving. I do want to bring up a little thing about making separate channels for commentaries and the like. I don't like it when creators do that. I'd rather have it all be in one place, as opposed to having different channels for different stuff. This is more of an FYI than anything, though. After my response, Neverdusk was very kind and supportive, wishing me good luck with more commentaries, which I am very grateful for. Thanks, Neverdusk. It really means a lot to me that you appreciate my work the way you and others do. It makes all the hours working on these things worth it. The next hefty comment comes from Noah Hall, who basically wrote a thesis as follows. "I agree with a fair amount of your criticisms in the video, and I like the long-form structure, but I do think you could use a bit of balance in your critique, or at least distance. I'll be honest, I'm lukewarm on Dark Souls 2. I think it's a game with some really cool ideas that were stifled by development issues, so I'm not really here to defend it. However, when I see a critique that's this long, I hope to get a fuller image of the game, understanding its flaws, and what others might have enjoyed. To be fair, I think you actually did this, but I can see where people might assume you're being overly negative early on because the negatives are grouped so heavily. Making it more like a sandwich might help, because after finishing the video, I can genuinely say that you seem fair to what is good within the game, using phrases like, 'it was a mixed bag for me.' That's perfect, so the only issue is perception. I really like the point on the agility stat, because that actually tore down the simple criticism of enemy hitboxes are just bad in DS2, or they track too much. Those factors are actually much the same all the way up till now. Just look at mimics of Dark Souls 3 and the giants in Sekiro. Instead, it's the fact that iframes are tied to a stat. But it feels that too much of the video groups its negatives so close, with no accounting for the behind-the-scenes situation, which has been public for quite some time, which means you end up assuming certain flaws are design decisions, which we now know was not the case in many situations. It's a similar flaw of Matthew Matos's DS2 critique, actually, and addressing that alone might have made for a more well-rounded critique. After all that, I gave a very basic response regarding the negativity throughout the video being something I will work on, and something that really did need to be balanced better. Noah responded in kind and said he was glad I got something out of it, and said I did have a knack for this, and he looks forward to the next one. Given that and what he said, there are a lot of negatives to talk about in Dark Souls 2, and my format is basically chronological during the walkthrough section, so if a bunch of bad stuff comes up in a row, that's how it'll turn out. Some parts of the analysis at the end could have used some more balancing, but I tend to cover a topic and give my opinion, and then move on to the next topic. I just pick an order, and if the negativity is sectioned off in some way, that's just how the leaves fall, but I will try to improve the balancing in the future. Some of the details of the game he pointed out were things that I disagree with, particularly the bad hitboxes of enemies in DS2, as, even without iframe boosting, these hitboxes are still terrible. The problem of tracking can be seen as a problem, but it's not a consistent problem, as some enemies don't have ridiculous tracking, but quite a lot do. He also mentions the behind-the-scenes aspects of the production of Dark Souls 2 quite a lot, which I understand was complicated and filled with issues, but the finished product is still subpar at the end of the day, even after a second chance. I won't give excuses, especially when they had an opportunity to fix things with Scholar of the First Sin, but the developers did very little to fix any problems they created the first time around. If Scholar didn't exist, I could chalk this up to a bad case of studio interference, but since Scholar does exist, as a definitive edition and a director's cut of the game, that already had and maintained its issues, it seems less like interference and more like incompetency. Thankfully, the next comment is short and funny from Cavallo Nellista do Diablo, who says, "The Majula finale was the best part of any video I've ever seen these days, LeMayo. All I'll say is, you're welcome." We jump back to Jack of No Trades when he asks, how come you didn't include Humanities in this at 7:03:29 for DS1 or Embers for DS3? I then gave my response of how I limited things to the most common healing items. Dark Souls gave a decent amount of humanity, but it wasn't what I would consider to be common. The same goes for Embers in Dark Souls 3. Since Dark Souls 2 gives you tons of life gems on top of Estus, I figured life gems were fair game to call common, and explain why that's a problem. The next comment starts with Benjamin Marino saying, I hope you play the DLCs. I don't know if that's considered separate from Scholar of the First Sin. I explained they are included, and some of the minor changes to Scholar I knew of at the time. James Brinsfield then appears and mentions how he respected how I ignored Scholar, but he still considers it his second favorite behind Bloodborne. He advised me to play it just to get the wider context, and I did play it and made a video on it. It's nowhere near as in-depth as the commentary was, but it pretty much felt like Dark Souls 2 patch 2.0. It really didn't feel that different for the most part, aside from some extra annoying counters here and there. By the way, Lou said, great video mate, really interesting. Thank you Lou, I try. The next long comment comes from D3 Groove, who says, just finished the video and here are my thoughts. This video is pretty well made, but suffers in the small stuff. A lack of knowledge concerning the lore makes some points look weak, the old Dragon Slayer being the earliest one I think. The point made about the Shrine of Winter seems ridiculous. No one plays a game like that the first time around. This also extends to the point about Dragon Rider. Most players won't play the game like that, assuming it's a serious playthrough. I also think that the point about the death counter is just silly. It's just a death counter. No huge lore implications. It's just there in case anyone was curious on the number. And the final point, a lot of people dislike how many more multiple enemy fights there are compared to the first game. I don't think it's fair to call these unfair. The game's improved combat means that these fights are much more doable compared to the fights on DS1. However, I do think From could have communicated this better, especially in moments when using the lock-on is not the best idea. That's about it right now. I'll probably watch this again if I get several hours to myself. You should visit Low Key Souls for some lore context if you want. I respond with some comments about what they're actually talking about, and then go over the death counter and multiple enemy problems, which we'll discuss in a minute. Then they respond by going over the lore inclusions for the Dragon Slayer, and then somewhat explaining the complaints about Dragon Rider, Shrine of Winter, and multiple enemy problems I discussed. Then it ends with Flood leaving a troll comment about the lore implications of the button references in Dark Souls 1. This is going to take a bit to respond to, so buckle up. First off, my actual response asks about the misgivings towards the old Dragon Slayer, the Shrine of Winter, and Dragon Rider, as what was said didn't really highlight any issues. It just said, nah man, people don't do that. Then it went over some details I'll bring up in a moment. Regarding a lack of knowledge of the lore, I said that this Ornstein ripoff is a ripoff, and asked questions about why Ornstein would be here. D3 Groove later states that the Dragon Slayer is basically a golem that tests you for the Blue Sentinels. Why does this golem have to look like a fan favorite? I don't really care about the lore that much at this point. I just don't think fan service is the best way to make a new boss. Regarding the Shrine of Winter criticism, I assume they saw where I did a test run farming souls so I can open the door, so they said that no one plays a game like that. That's why it was a test run. To do a test. To do something weird that could potentially happen. In any case, this completely disregards what I said in the video about getting enough souls to unlock the shrine, without venturing down the path to Freya. You can get enough souls before even reaching the intersection that leads towards Freya's path. Imagine if someone just wanted to grind a bit for upgrade materials, or life gems, or levels for a particular weapon or spell, that eventually puts them over the edge of 1,000,000 so they can go to Drangleic Castle before defeating the old ones. Imagine if someone just wanted to grind a bit for upgrade materials, or life gems, or levels for a particular weapon or spell, that eventually puts them over the edge of 1,000,000 so they can go to Drangleic Castle before defeating all the old ones. Now, Scholar of the First Sin fixed this, but imagine if Dark Souls 1 or 3 had that system, where every enemy you needed to defeat to reach the final boss just had a souls threshold instead. How much content would be skipped on purpose or by accident if players didn't have to defeat an enemy that kills them a lot? What if they could just grind for an hour and give up on the boss just to progress? That would negatively impact the gameplay and progression, because players would have an easy but boring out to avoid bosses they don't like or struggle with. It'd ruin the challenge and objective when there is a simple "you've got enough souls" to get out of doing something the story expects you to do. Now to the Dragon Rider situation. D3 Groove seems to forget that the bow section where I whittle his health down is a test to see if it could be done, and I outright say I don't recommend doing the fight this way, before saying that fighting him normally is faster and easier since he's such a boring and simple boss. It's not that I'm recommending people do the boring stuff to kill him, it's the fact that you can do it in the first place that is the problem. Moving on to the death counter, I simply said it was stupid to have a plaque out in the open memeing the number of deaths had by the community in the game. It's just a random meme placed in the game. That's really all it is. It's purely stupid. It takes people out of the moment when there's a big-ass sign that says, deaths are at 1,243,998,456. You've got to ask yourself this honest question. The developers will work on a death tracker, but they won't fix hitboxes. Think about that. Like I said, a Skyrim-style statistics screen would have done the same thing, and it wouldn't be so on the nose. The final section covers the multiple enemy encounters. Multiple enemies aren't the problem, as I said in my response. It's how they are balanced. A few tough enemies will be just as much of a challenge as many weak enemies, but having many tough enemies with high health, damage, and numbers begins to become overwhelming and a downright chore to deal with them. I said it then, I'll say it now. Swipe at the horde, run away, repeat. The next comment comes from Austin Griffith, who says, "You can't respec anytime you want. Soul vessels are very rare. Expecting players to understand how stats work without having first played the game is one of the great failings of RPGs. This form of respec is a perfect compromise." And you can see my massive response. It basically goes over that the problem isn't that soul vessels are rare, it's that we can respec at all that I have a problem with, as you can essentially undo whatever build you're working with if a certain area doesn't gel with it, or if you want to rebuild your character if you find out your build lacks in something. I then explained that choice is good, but consequences to said choices have a larger impact, and the Souls series expects you to take choices seriously. At least, it used to. Then I talk about the failings of RPGs part, which I explain isn't a problem of RPGs, it's a problem of bad RPGs that don't explain their stats well enough. Because of this bad explanation for adaptability and agility, many players' strategies for rolling have complications, because they don't have enough to protect themselves anymore, which leads to less options for builds as glass cannons are significantly less viable unless the iframes are normal. Yes, we know the iframe situation in Dark Souls 2 now, but that doesn't justify taking a consistent system from previous games and purposely screwing with it just to make the game harder. This will inadvertently cause players to shy away from rolling, severely limiting what they can do in combat, as now they can't use the simple dodge. Now they have to tank or parry because otherwise it means taking damage. This was a restrictive choice that the developers made. It's not a problem of the genre as a whole. It's the individual games that screw this up that are the problem. Now let's tackle the perfect compromise. This is not a perfect compromise. I'll say that right now. I think Austin is misinterpreting what I'm saying regarding this, as he mentioned players not understanding a stat without first playing the game as a problem. That's not a problem. The problem is that the game does not tell you how this works. You have to do deep testing to find it. This isn't something you'll casually notice. You have to dig to learn that one of the integral systems of combat has been screwed, and that is not a positive in any way. I mentioned several times in the video, Dark Souls 2 creates problems and gives alternatives or solutions to said problem when none of it needed to exist in the first place. Having iframes screwed up isn't fixed by a respec, when many won't know the iframes change based on a stat. The game doesn't tell you this, and that is why I have a huge problem with it. This is an artificial problem that was hidden from players, and as such, is quite annoying to deal with for first-time players, and experienced players will groan when they have to dump levels into something just to get what the other games gave from the start. It also doesn't make it a compromise when two systems have next to nothing to do with each other. This is an argument someone else made, but we'll get to it later. Just because System A may or may not support System B, that doesn't mean that the developers designed it like that when the other systems in place have problems because of System A or B. These are not complementary ideas that play off each other. This is one system in place, respeccing via soul vessels, that can help fix the problem in another system, iframe ADP levels, when neither system needed to exist. Anyway, Titus on Crack commented, "Is this Matthew Matosis reborn? I love it." Then he adds, "Also, how does this only have 2,000 views? I thank you for the compliment, and don't worry, this video is in the 5-digit range now." The next comment by Luca Dubac says, "Deserves more views," which many seem to agree with, and that makes me very proud of the work I put into the project. The next comment comes from insert edgy name here, who references my preference for Dark Souls 1's humanity system over DS2 and 3 systems by saying, "Humanity spamming invaders PTSD intensifies." To that, I can only laugh, as I'm sure I would do the same. The next thread starts off with Ash saying, "Do more of these," where I let them know I am making more, and then Agustina Segura says, "Can't wait. More is coming, much more. Just have to wait a bit as these take forever." The next comment comes from Vapor Blast, who says, "Good info, it a masterpiece." Thank you for the compliment. I hope that video was very informative to newcomers to the series. Blue Moon comments, "At least DS2 have good PvP, right jesters? And I can only imagine how annoying it is to go up against a jester who can't be backstabbed." Goidamar the Nomad chimes in by saying, "I tried really hard to love this game, but almost everything you said here is factual. You can still love it, it just might take some time and some therapy for those hitboxes." Maz Shaik, a regular of my Dark Souls 2 stuff, said, "Finally!" and then added several fire emojis. You're welcome and enjoy. The next comment comes from Mayo-chan, who says, "My theory for the way a lot of things are in Dark Souls 2 is that when the pre-release footage they showed with the cool lighting effects was actually a build they lost late into development, and what we have now, the scraps made from a more unfinished build. Some levels weren't finished, so they had to fill in the gaps with some rather nonsensical level design. I don't think any build or amount of extra time the team would need could save the game's piss-poor writing, though." That's an interesting theory, Mayo. Personally, I imagine they made the pre-release footage and cleaned it up to look as good as possible, and then mismanaged their time, and so we got the downgraded Dark Souls 2. Scholar was an opportunity to fix the issues and make the game they wanted, but instead it was just more of the same, only it looked a little nicer. The storytelling in the game is pretty ass, so I have to agree there. The next comment comes from Tokyo Bassist, who reminded me about the Ceaseless Discharge information I got wrong in the video, before saying they hope to see more from me. Thank you, and I have definitely looked back on some sections of the video and been like, how the hell did you screw this up? Red Star Cat simply says, "Good video." To that I say, good comment. The next essay comes from Aiden, and it's a long one, so I'm going to section it off as I respond to it. He starts off by saying, "I'm just over 40 minutes into this critique, and while I have respect for the clear amount of investment it must have taken to produce this, it feels like there's a multitude of arbitrary or poorly formed criticisms so far. This is a decent start to an argument, as he's trying to be even-handed, but wait until you see it all to get the full context." He continues, saying, "For one, ADP was directly designed to account for the inclusion of a much more in-depth dual-wielding mechanic in 2. Power stancing is a massive damage boost and a great playstyle, but it also forces you to go shieldless, which I always prefer anyway. Consequently, you're given the option of either investing more heavily early on into other stats suiting a more defensive or shield-equipped build, or committing to a roll-heavy build. In my opinion, a dual-wielder build, given the standard DS1 amount of iframes without a sacrifice, would be busted levels of overpowered." Now he's made his first major point, but there's a problem with this. If ADP was directly designed to account for dual-wielding and power stancing, then the mechanic stretches too far, because every build is hindered by low ADP from the start, whether they use dual-wielding or not. If ADP had been added to account for dual-wielding, then dual-wielding should sacrifice iframes as a result. This would fulfill the risk and reward structure of these games. That could have been an interesting take, even though I think it would have still been a little too much for a dual-wielding setup. Personally, power stancing on its own is a fine idea, without the added problems with ADP. I think it's a fair trade as is, since you have to dump a considerable amount of souls to power stance any of the weapons, and you can't have a shield to block. I don't think ADP should or needs to be involved. It should be a thing that registers when you're power stancing, to give you less iframes. Another way this could work is by increasing the damage you take. This could further the glass cannon build, as power stancing clearly is trying something with that build specifically, so it could increase damage taken by the same margin as your damage increased by dual wielding. It would have taken it further down the glass cannon route, where there is even more risk and more reward, but this isn't the case. Getting back to the argument, I would have to say that ADP was not designed for dual wielding, as nothing changes when you dual wield apart from increased damage and style. This is just grasping at straws to make something in the game seem deeper than it actually is. If power stancing reduced iframes as a result, as Aiden is implying by saying ADP is connected to dual wielding, then they would be connected, but this doesn't happen, so the argument holds no water. In regard to the idea of DS1 having a system like this, I stand by what I said earlier. It's just a glass cannon build, but taken farther to the extreme, so I think it could have worked fine in DS1 or 2 if they implemented it as I suggested. If they implemented it as Aiden suggests, then players that wanted to dual wield in either games would have to farm more levels than usual because they need enough to dual wield and enough to cover iframe balancing. Not to mention the weight of some weapons that could cause you to dump souls into equip load so you don't fat roll, which would require even more ADP farming to cover that. It's not a bad idea to have a build like that in these games. It just doesn't seem like they built any systems for it specifically in Dark Souls 2, like what Aiden suggests. Moving on to the next argument, Aiden says, further, you mentioned the Haid Knights being poorly designed, but your only backup as to why is essentially just them being difficult. I would disagree that their attacks are poorly telegraphed. There are definite tells to each of their strikes, and they're no more frenetic than a given enemy from 3, Bloodborne, or Sekiro. The fact that they're optional discounts any complaint on their health and damage output, with you even comparing them to Black Knights, who have high health and damage output. Really don't get this one. Alright then. First, my only backup is not that they are essentially just difficult. It's that they are poorly telegraphed as the main problem. I can get around large health or high damage, but poor telegraphing makes players cheese them or hit and run, where the combat becomes tedious. Also, I said poorly telegraphed, not telegraphed at all. There are tells to what they will do next, but some of those tells are them just standing there. That's not telegraphing an attack. That's forgetting to fully animate something. The point about frantic enemy attacks in the games that came afterwards is weak at best, as you're comparing 3 very different games to a game that came before them, with only one of them being from the same franchise. Dark Souls 3 has its share of frantic attacks, but most of them have some telegraphing to indicate a long combo is coming. Bloodborne definitely has a lot of spastic enemies, but I would still complain about them there, which I do, so this doesn't absolve Dark Souls 2 of its problems. I haven't played much of Sekiro, so I won't comment on that game one way or the other. Also, Dark Souls and Demon Souls didn't have an enemy that would stand around and suddenly attack without telegraphing it like Dark Souls 2 does. It's very telling about the Haid Knights' design that one major telegraphing of an attack for them is that there is next to no telegraphing whatsoever. You also mention how they are like Black Knights, which I agree with, but saying that they're optional doesn't discount any problems with them. If the Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1 was optional, it would still be the worst boss in the game. That doesn't change if it's mandatory or not. Also, are all criticisms of the DLC countered by those being optional? Believe me, you don't want to substantiate an argument by saying something's okay because it's optional, when playing the game in general is optional. You don't want to open that can of worms. Anyway, he continues with, you suggest the sewer connection to Haid's Tower being the only possible route is silly, only to point out the fact that large chunks of it have crumbled into the ocean. I'm not sure I even have to explain why this point is flawed at its core. Complaining about the fall deaths possible for enemies and the player character also makes little sense, assuming you don't hold one to the same standard. If areas featuring easy fall deaths are bad level design, we can probably just disregard massive chunks of every single Souls game. This is where this gets annoying, because Aiden has blatantly misrepresented what I said, calling it silly, but his counterpoint is silly in and of itself. I asked why the route to Haid's Tower was designed the way it was, and gave an example of what could have been an interesting way to connect them. Using something like the second half of Tomb of the Giants from the first game as an example, where you can find a bonfire along the edge. They could have had something similar, where you go along the coast of Majula and run into a bonfire that connects you to a structure that connects to the few remaining areas left of Haid's Tower. Also, saying that the sewer connection being the only possible route to Hades Tower is silly is blatantly stupid because there's only one way to get to Hades Tower. Period. You can't go to it backwards because the No Man's Wharf boat doesn't go back from the Lost Bastille. There are no other land connections via broken passages or structures that could get you to Hades Tower other than the sewer, so what Aiden said there is just plain wrong. Complaining about the fall deaths is something I have done for all the games, and I never mentioned that Dark Souls 1 gets a pass for it, or any of the spin-offs and sequels for that matter. I simply stated it as an opinion, which I still hold, that drops of death are annoying for me personally. I either fall in, or cheese the enemies to fall to their deaths. It takes away from the combat when you can lead an enemy to an edge and bait them into falling off, or when you get slapped once and fall. Also, disregard massive chunks of every single Souls game is a stretch as there aren't that many sections of the games that have bad drops. Most areas have something to keep you from falling off the nearby ledge, or the platforms themselves are wide enough where it's only an issue if you position yourself poorly. Also, parkour sections are absolute trash in this series across the board. Sekiro was the first one to get it right, but we suffered until then. The next point is brief, saying, I'm not sure how using the sex change coffin conflicts with the narrative. The coffin is its own thing with no real explanation, and succeeds the intro cinematic. The coffin does not succeed the intro cinematic, because it's about a man and his backstory, so changing to a woman wouldn't do anything to progress that or change that. Hell, it doesn't even matter if we do it. We've basically all been forced to have the same backstory, and now we can convert back and forth between genders for some reason. I will concede that it doesn't affect the narrative in any way, and I did phrase that poorly. It is still weird that we can change whenever, and that our character has such a definitive backstory, unlike the other games, besides Sekiro, of course. The next section says, you suggest that having an option to bypass the Lord Soul requirement for Drangleic Castle is lazy, as if anyone but speedrunners, and yourself, for the sole purpose of visualizing your critique, would opt to ignore the remaining gear, covenants, and useful merchants found throughout the other paths. Approaching the castle at only 1 million soul memory, not accounting for souls lost or spent outside of leveling, would also make for a fairly tough experience moving forward, I'd imagine. This is an argument I understand where he's coming from, but the problem isn't that speedrunners largely ignore content, and my test just did it for the sake of it. It's that players can inadvertently miss large portions of the game simply because the game's requirements weren't based on killing specific enemies, but getting enough souls. As I said, what if somebody farms souls for some reason and misses an area because they forgot about it or didn't notice it? Or if they are stuck on a boss and farm to level up more? Something simple like these examples can cause new players to miss things in playthroughs. Dark Souls 1 had several requirements to be met for progression, so it would be very unlikely that you'd miss any major area or boss on your first playthrough up to beating the game. Demon Souls has even more requirements, since you have to go everywhere and defeat almost every boss to finish the game. Exploration is good for these games, but some people may not look around enough or remember areas, and as such, content will be ignored or missed. If the game can't direct you towards the 4 major paths of the world before opening up the rest of it, I don't think its guidance is sufficient, or its planning was well thought out. The last section of the comment says, don't get the wrong idea, I also think you give several solid criticisms as well. Several of them are mirrored from Matthew Matos's video, but it doesn't hurt to revisit them. I'll continue watching, but I think it could have done you well to balance out criticism and acknowledgement of strengths more evenly. While I imagine you may further on, having an opening 40 minutes consisting of very across-the-board criticism of everything you pass by is disheartening when looking at the runtime. Many of the subjects discussed, if evidently an issue, could therefore be implicated as a critique of the first as well, which doesn't seem to be the intent so far. It ultimately gives an impression of picking and choosing. Either way, your sense of humor is strong. Hope you continue with this channel. This is where we get a more even-handed approach to the video, and I do agree that I needed to balance the criticism more. But that's the problem with the game. It has a lot of things to criticize. The opening 40 minutes consisting of across-the-board criticism isn't necessarily intentional. I tend to tackle things as they come up, or will bring them up if I don't find an appropriate place to discuss them. Most of the opening is of Majula and criticisms of the bonfires, leveling up system, Estus system, ADP criticisms, and level progression. There's a lot I discussed there because these things all really come into play at that point of the game. As we find our first Estus shard, we reach our hub, we can finally level up, and we reach the point where everything shifts and the game really starts. Because of all that, I thought it was appropriate to bring up all the things I mentioned here, as I should get these things out of the way now so that the other areas wouldn't be crammed with a random rant about ADP or Estes changes, or other things. I'm not sure what he means with implicated as a critique of the first as well, as I do reference times where Dark Souls 1 or Demon Souls had a similar problem if it's applicable to both games referenced, or Dark Souls 2, or the games that came after it. As for the picking and choosing line, I could understand an impression, but impressions change by the end of the video, and I personally believe it's best to leave a comment after the video is over so you can collect your thoughts and get the full context of the video. That being said, I appreciate the comment as it wasn't just a "my Dark Souls 1 cult," which we'll see later, but it had some points to it and was trying to be respectful. Also, I plan to continue this channel for as long as I'm able. Then D. Raven pops up again, saying DS2 bad, deal with it, which isn't exactly fair to the game, but it's still funny. Aiden agrees, I assume sarcastically, before Tassorodri, hopefully I did that right, comments, "Don't know if you continue watching, but in on the 2-hour mark, and it doesn't really get any better." It doesn't help that he describes almost every multiple encounter as spam, completely disregarding that DS2 and its healing system is designed around multiples. I generally like this kind of video, but what made Matthew Matos's video good was that he really liked Dark Souls, and had very good things to say about that game, while also criticizing everything that he didn't like. In this video, 95% of the things are negative. To me, it feels like bitching about every single possible thing that you could, while not holding any other game to the same standard. Now let's dig into this. Yes, many multiple opponent encounters have spam. That's throughout the game, and I talk about it. Deal with it. DS2's system of healing isn't explicitly designed for multiples. Life gems are basically just a backup Estus if you need them, which you will for the early game unless you're an absolute pro player. Now, the reason Mr. Matos's videos on Dark Souls and the rest of the series are great isn't because he liked the games and he criticized what he didn't like. He explained the depth of the successes and failures of each game, and the series overall, as well as going into the mechanics and design choices that led to each game's decisions, and he called them out when he thought the decisions were shit, or if they were objectively poor design choices. He explains why things are good or bad in an understandable and informative way, because he is aware of a lot of things that other gamers aren't, so he adds insight into the videos that many others don't have. My video on Dark Souls 2 isn't nearly as good as his videos on Demon Souls or Dark Souls 1, and that's because he's been doing this much longer than I have, and he's figured things out. This was my first outing into this type of content, but I feel pretty proud of the end result. It's not perfect, but I think about 90% of it still holds up to scrutiny. The reason this video is 95% negative is because Dark Souls 2 was a massive step back for the series as a whole. Changes were made that some can subjectively argue are worse, but many choices are objectively worse than its predecessors, so there is a lot to criticize. I was very negative in this review, perhaps too much, but that doesn't negate all the criticism that the game deserves for its choices. Also, please explain every time my bitching didn't hold the same standard for the other games. List them and I can fix the problem. If you don't list them, you look like an ass. In any case, I don't hold the games to the exact same standard, because each game should be better given what came before. The fact that Dark Souls 2 came out after Demon Souls, a very good game, and Dark Souls, a great game, and Dark Souls 2 was below par in most ways, says that the developers weren't up to the challenge of making a Souls game, or they simply didn't get it, and just played on the memes of cheap difficulty no matter the cost to their reputations or the series. Just imagine this for a moment, if Dark Souls 3 was the second Dark Souls game we got, and we still had a third coming. Just food for thought. After that, Flood appears again, saying, "Yeah, Matthew Matosis is always objective in trying to look at things in the best light. I could tell as soon as he went on about an 8-year-old re-release is a ripoff, and he wouldn't comment on it, that this video was going to be more about venting than objective game criticism, or even commentary." Then she says to Raven, "Someone can't dodge without relying on iframes." Time for asshole cleanup. Mr. Matosis was very objective with his commentary on games, but he'll be harsh when he needs to be, if something is just dumb. He showed that when he called the bloody overlay to the Dark Souls 2 boss cinematics incredibly dumb. He's not adverse to criticism with a side of sass, although it is rare given his calm demeanor. Also, Flood misrepresented what I said when she brought up the 8-year-old re-release as a ripoff, and saying that I said I wouldn't comment on it when I said nothing of the sort. I was criticizing the fact that all the PC versions of these games, except Dark Souls Remastered, have the interface in Xbox controls, which is ridiculous for that to happen on PC. Plus, I said it took 7 years for them to get that right, not 8, so it shows how much Flood paid attention to the video, especially since this was said within the first 15 minutes. As a side note, notice how I held all the games to the same standard with that mechanical criticism? Notice how that wasn't me venting, but criticizing a mechanical issue? An objective issue? Now for the big one. Flood, sweetheart. How is my Dark Souls 2 video considered not objective game criticism and commentary when I, A, go over how the mechanics work, B, go over how the level design works, C, go over how the narrative and storytelling works, D, go over how the encounters work, E, go over differences in these things from previous games, F, criticize or commend different aspects of the previously mentioned things affecting the overall quality of the game in question, G, give my opinions on these things as I discuss them, and H, tell people that I have fun with the game at the end, which is a recommendation to play it. I'm sorry, but how is this not objective criticism and commentary again? Also, you can't dodge effectively without iframes. I figured you would know that since, you know, that's a thing the games do. Even Dark Souls 2. You're inadvertently criticizing the game you're defending, because Dark Souls 2 also has iframes, and your criticism rings true for it, as well as the others. Not to mention that Dark Souls 2 provides more iframes than the other games when you max out the right stats. Just a little note for the next time you criticize something. Think about what you're saying first. After that mess, we'll see a comment from J-Rock Pachow, who says, "This is a good video, but the fact that I'm 3 hours in and you are arguing that you can't keep smoking a pot is just dumb. Blow a joint into a glass jar and boom, cursed pot." That's a good point, and my comment concedes that, and I realize how useless it was to go over that at this point. I still stand by the fact that the cursed pots cursing you before breaking them is stupid, but I will admit the other point about smoke staying in is dumb. The next thread starts with Alfred Leth saying, "I really like this video and think it lives up to Matthew's. However, I wish you would focus more on the moments of good design. I think Forest of Fallen Giants, No Man's Wharf, The Gutter, and Iron Keep, for example, have great level design, even better than the average Dark Souls 1 level. The DLCs too are, in my opinion, peak level design out of any Souls game, only rivaling the Old Hunters, Cathedral of the Deep, and parts of Sekiro." I would respond to this myself, but Thrashing Puts pretty much covers that for me by saying, "The Gutter and Iron Keep have good level design?" I completely disagree. If we were talking about the Gutter level that was initially promised before it got cut, then I'd have agreed. But as is the theme with Dark Souls 2, most aspects amount to a shallow imitation of its predecessor. The DLCs aren't that good either. The Ivory King DLC literally looked like the Northern Limit from Demon's Souls, but just made playable. Broom Tower and especially Shelva are definitely better though, but still nowhere near close to the Old Hunters, Artorias of the Abyss, or most of the other games in general. While I do think some areas of Dark Souls 2 are pretty good, most still are below the other games' levels in quality. Personally, I'd say the Broom Tower has the best level design of Dark Souls 2, but that's really just an opinion. The next comment chain is both hilarious and vicious, starting with One More Desu commenting, "Iframes based on stat and roll distance, based on weight. DS1 players, no, you can't just make stats do things in a video game. Tomohiro, haha, HP go brrrr." This gave me a good laugh. Then Flood appears again to salt the fields by saying, "The fact that so many people hate this game purely because they have to think about positioning and actually dodge instead of relying on game logic iframes is telling about the Souls community." Flood is turning into a recurring character at this point. Also, it's weird how this proper dodging thing is the hill she decides to die on. How else are we supposed to dodge the attack if its hitbox is too big to back away from? We can't duck or jump, so we have to roll through it or take damage. I've said this already, and it's getting old. Anyway, I responded, giving a reflection of what I could say in a similar vein. Then Flood responded, saying, "Ironic that the series that gets praised for forcing players to adapt and overcome has a community of players hell-bent on ensuring they never have to do that. Great video, by the way, on Ironic. I just disagree with a lot of the DS2 hate. I respect your passion." Again, I don't get why this is the hill to die on, but now I can't even tell if all her comments up to this point are ironic or not. So now I'm just confused. Seriously, we're adapting to the attack by choosing to roll, or parry, or block, depending on our build and preference. It's optional to dodge sometimes, and some people don't even roll at all. It's doable, but sometimes it's the best option. Plus, it was there in the other games, and some people don't want to be forced to use a shield. Appreciate the compliment on the video, though. This ends with Dopamine saying, "DS2 spastics not understanding what made DD great to begin with and make double-digit IQ claims." I think they're talking about Dark Souls, but I can't tell. In any case, they probably think 99 IQ is all they ought to have. The next comment comes from Mitch Ryan saying, "As a sexist, I saw nothing sexist in this game." Kinda weird to out yourself as a sexist, Mitch, but that's your choice. On a side note, I only said it could be considered sexist. I never said it was definitive. Just weird to see how much women-related foolery came up in the game. This next comment chain I'm not even going to read to you, as this is just one long bruh moment in the comments. I regret involving myself in it at all at this point, but I'm leaving my comment up for context. I think Cynical Gold is onto something, by the way. Anil Yasatan commented, "Good work, but that clown character was painful to watch. Thanks for the compliment." The next comment comes from Ash, and they link a timestamp at 3:11:25. I'm unsure what they mean by this, as this is in the middle of talking about the rat NPC showing up after the Royal Rat Authority boss. I don't know what Ash is getting at with this, so I can't say anymore. Ash did it again, this time linking to 3:44:37. This time I'm talking about the mid-level summon in Shrine of Amana, and how having an NPC helper throughout the game could have been a cool development. Again, not sure what Ash's thoughts are on these links. Daniel Christensen comments next with a brodacious, "Great fucking video." Thank you, Daniel. Great fucking comment. Ash pops up again, linking to 4:40, where I talk about the main gimmick of Shulva being puzzle solving and platforming. Again, don't know why Ash marked it. The next comment comes from Nimby Live, who says, "That entire intro of DS2 was pretty poorly done. The father figure you have to be, but then may not be once in the character creator, to the old lady saying you will lose your souls over and over again. I enjoyed the game, but the story was awful. I feel the same." Again, Ash links to 5038, where I talk about the Titanite slab sitting in a chest in the early game section of Forest of Fallen Giants. Hateful Gaming links to 2:04:30 saying, "Bro, what?" where I talk about the potential sexism in the project. It is probably the most grasping at straws I do in the video, so I kinda get how weird it sounds now. Maz Shaik commented saying, "Why you delayed it, XD?" And I say it was to let the anticipation mount. Also, to make the premiere seem better, since I barely had any viewers at the time. J.K. Smith comments next with, "His take is probably that he dislikes Dark Souls 2 and its apologists. He basically said that on Twitter at the time. I don't know who this is referring to, and I've barely used Twitter and have not said that, so I don't know who this is directed towards. It might be Matthew Matosis, but again, I don't think it's really relevant at this point." Camille791 then says, "Do a DS3 comm," and I say I am working on it, as we speak, which is true, even now. And the best comment was saved for last. This comes from Meet Me Somewhere, who says, "Oh look, another Dark Souls 2 bad video." Dark Souls 1 fanatics might as well be a documented cult at this point. I responded, unlike a cult member, very calmly saying, "Please explain exactly how I and every other cynic have viewed Dark Souls 2 incorrectly, what we've missed, and try to think outside the boat of my Dark Souls 1 cult." Then Dopamine pops in again to say DS2 is trash, and I feel sorry for any double-digit IQ spastic that enjoys it. Even though I'm one of those spastics, because I enjoy it. Well, that's all the comments at the time of recording. Again, I apologize to those who commented and weren't included in this, but I can't wait forever. Sorry. I'd just like to thank everybody who watched the video and left a comment with their thoughts and feelings of it, as it really helps me learn what I can improve on and what to expect next time around. As an added bonus, here is a snip of the overall reception to the video as of recording, you know, since YouTube doesn't think people should see dislikes nowadays. I might do videos like this for other commentaries, but that really depends on the response to each one. Once again, thank you to all those who helped get the video where it is today. And lastly, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys later.